What did the U.S. Navy do? Well, we got this submarine, man, and we got a big propeller shaft on the back, you know, and we've been telling them about these missile tubes, man, you know, and then we got torpedo tubes. So what we did, man, is we made a bridge like a USS Enterprise, man, you know. And since we don't have any screen windows in a submarine, you know, we open up our windows, we're launching stuff, you know. And so we had the aircraft carrier, right? But the aircraft carrier, its wavelength, you know, was on top of the water, you know. But I wish it could be a man on top of the stairs, a little bit taller. So we're like, well, they want to be the man on top of the stairs and a little bit taller, so we got to do some stuff for the International Space Station. So he says, okay, no problem, guys, we got you. And we're like, so the International Space Station says, can you help us out? And we're like, yeah, sure we can. So what we did is, he says, well, we have the International Space Station. So what we did is we said, well, what we need to do then is we need to make a NASA. Okay? And how are we going to make NASA, man? We got to get something up there to get there, you know? So we were limited in our scope, okay? Remember oscilloscope, measuring the wavelengths? So we're limited in our scope, you know, on top of the water. So we're like, we had a one wavelength, and maybe the next day we cross over and we have a different wavelength, you know? We don't understand the dynamic nature, you know, associations, you know? It's like a dynamic nature, you know, associate. So he says, I tell you what, you know, we got these aircrafts, man, and we're trying to figure to launch them with the proper wavelength, you know. So we go up, maybe you fall down, you know. Go. So we said, well, maybe, okay, you know, maybe we take one of those little plateaus up in the mountain. We test with that, but we can't really do a lot because it's a plateau that's already there. It's natural, you know. So we try to launch this off a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, you know, and we try to have enough to where we could make it over the peak, you know. So we're like, okay, I tell you what, this is what we'll do, you know. We got to figure out how we can get more resistance here to adjust the wavelength. So we need to adjust the wavelength here so we have a smoother landing, you know, like that, you know, to adjust the power curve. So what I say is, you know, here we go. Well, under the sea, you guys remember that video? Under the sea, under the sea, under the sea. So you need more bandwidth. So we want to increase the wavelength. It says, you want full bubble or half bubble? You want full bubble or half bubble? Where you want it, okay? You want us to go deeper? Okay, Navy diver. For the Davidian Star, we said, tell you what, we'll go full bubble. You know, it says, you want to surface full bubble? You want to dive for the bubble? Okay, for the bubble people, we're going to increase the wavelength, okay? More than ever before. We're going to go where no man has gone before. The USS Enterprise. And to make them know about it, we put a boat on top of the water and we call it USS Enterprise. And we say, and when we get the International Space Station together, man, we're going to remember this cool stuff. And it says, remember that Navy? So we work together with Japan, China, all the world, man. And it says, remember this? It says, we got to increase the wavelength to understand what we're doing. And what we want to do is we understand the compression ratios. So we got the big missile tube here and a trident missile. And what we want to do is a missile tracking for rocket launches so we can understand just what's going on. Now, we round this cone off a little bit, you know. That way you get a blunt edge object, you know. And when we release it, there's no fire. You know, everybody said, we got Greek fire, man. It burn underwater, man. Yeah, sure. You guys don't even know what Greek fire is. I'll tell you what. So, we open the tubes. We pressurize it. We send air out with it. Okay? And this is a separation of the Challenger shuttle. Okay? So, we got a bubbles. Remember the C-Lab, you know, the shark movie with the C-Lab cooking a breakfast. The black guy's like, "This is how you make a perfect omelet." Nigga, you gotta go up with the bubbles. Remember the little tanks that keep the sharks away? We put all that technology underwater in a submarine. Okay, and he said, "Mr. Kirk, go on this tour in a submarine. You're gonna need to know this one day." And I says, "Okay." So we got this Trident missile going up with the bubbles, and what we wanted to see is, if we let this missile out of this tube pressurized with the bubbles underneath, bubbles, 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 bubbles underneath, okay? And this is heavy, plus it's got the resistance of the water. We release the... Now, would these bubbles reach the surface before this? Well, we found out that depending on the resistance or the currents of the ocean and the wind ratio under the water, we could test wind, you know, with bubbles. It would affect how long it would take for this to reach the surface. What we found is, well, I can't answer that for plausible deniability about whether or not the bubbles reach the surface of the water or not. It's top secret. So there you go. And now, so once we increase the wavelength, we could also increase the momentum of the ocean. Now, if we did it in a storm or not in a storm, we could try and catch between up, nope, up, nope. So we had to wait till the surface is just about right. And if there's a storm, we could surface at the top of a wavelength, right? And then when it's coming up, the top of a wavelength, right? So if we could meet the surface right as this comes down and it's on its way back up, you know, halfway back up, and this meet the surface at the same time, with that momentum, how far out of the water would this rocket bounce? Way up in the air, okay? And then the rocket get up in the air, okay? And then once it's up in the air, we wanted to see how far it would go without coming back down, and then ignite the rockets, you know? So we can sit there, you know, with a little button, and it's like, cool, ignite. You know how? Because we had the submarine there, and then Mr. Kirk, myself, you know, I had my dad's on the submarine. You gotta watch this rocket launch, man, it's pretty cool. I says, cool. So my dad goes under the water, he says, man, and while we're under the water, what I need you to do, I need you to sit on this boat, right here. Okay, we're sitting on this boat. We got suet like a Titanic kind of thing and stuff, man, all kind of crap. And it's called the Range Sentinel. The Range Sentinel from the USS Navy. So it says, son, can you explain the range, scope of the wavelength that we're testing here with this underwater Trident nuclear, you know, missile? I says, well, I don't know, man. It depends on the diplomatic nations, their education and understanding, their network connectivity, and their transmission length. So if I could get their diplomatic networks, and I could get their education, okay, and I could get their understanding, you know, maybe I could, you know, get them to understand, you know, education, understanding, you know, and then maybe once I get them there, I could get them to do, you know, maybe a network connection, you know. So I get the wired network connections, you know, doing a networking. They found out I was doing that. They got really mad, man. I say IEEE, you know, E to the third power. And, you know, E to the third power, you turn it up, you know, in case you got a little sideways, you get a little wisdom, you know. And Robin Williams was trying to say that. It says, I don't like the way you're talking to my man, man. My man, he's going to do you something crazy, man. What's this? So it says, you know, understanding networking, you know. So it's like connectivity. Okay, and then, you know, you see this, and you could change those words too. You could say telemetry. Okay, the connectivity of telemetry. Okay, now I want you to understand one thing, you know, and the length Now, you got a factor. You got the length of the displacement, and you also have the length of the wavelength. And, you know, which also affects the boat, you know, which is why I took a 26-foot boat. And then I also took like a 32-foot boat, you know. And it's like, you know, that affects the speed on the course of the top of the surface of the water. Okay, now, remember you got the fission, you know, when you got the little white caps, you know, little rough seas and stuff, you know. So, you know, try to simulate that a little bit behind the boat. Maybe it'll slow it down some, you know, or will it help it speed up some? Well, we don't know. We're trying to figure this out, you know, with the weather system. I mean, they said water evaporates and then it compresses. And I'm like, well, if water evaporates, we put some bubbles under the water, and once it gets higher, you know, if it compresses, well, no, because the compression of the air is, you know, and we got the moisture, humidity, you know, but you get a higher in those altitudes, you know, it's it's spread apart, so there's nothing making these bubbles compress before they get to the surface. So, you know, I just want to know about that wavelength, you know, and the length of the telemetry of this calculation these people's been doing, you know, because the length of the boat affects the speed on the surface of water, and so does the stuff underneath. And just like it does through, now if I turn it sideways, I turn the world sideways, I put a tail wing on there, and I get a little plane wing here, and maybe I put a little jet engine on it, maybe a little stuff on the back just for the heck of it. Because when I spread it out here underwater, you know, it didn't collapse on it. You know, it didn't collapse on it as it was going to the surface. You know, so if I think about the clouds and the weather systems of their wavelengths and stuff, and I start doing the research, and I know I've been on a submarine, I've been to angles and dangles and stuff, so I'm thinking of airplanes and stuff, you know, and all this other stuff that people don't understand. You know, if I had a Trident nuclear submarine guy, you know, for a dad, and they Navy, United States Navy, trust me enough as a kid to go on a live nuclear Trident missile submarine and operate all of this stuff and show me how the entire boat works except for the nuclear room, because, you know, nobody needs to know about my little nuclear room. And I says, you know, and they told me this, and the torpedo tubes. Now, the torpedo tubes is, if we're underwater, and you got a little bit of air bubble in those torpedoes, man, how are we going to keep them level? How are we going to keep, did anybody think about that? How are we going to keep them level, man? I mean, we got other submarines under there. We did some research on that, you know. Well, we're at this depth, and we got this much air or this much non-air of compression in this torpedo. You got this torpedo? Yeah, well, you know, we had a copper line for 2 reasons, right? He says, well, you know, we shoot the torpedo out. Remember the aircraft carrier? Oh, shoot the torpedo out, right? And come out with the bubbles in the air, man. And says, well, can you get the logistics on that? You know, hey, we'll vacuum pack it, man. Take the air out of the tube, send it in there. And what about the torpedo? Well, if it's vacuum packed too much, it'll sink. And if not, it'll rise and we'll miss our targeting, you know? So it says, well, we just got to adjust it. Well, we'll leave a copper wire, because we could copper wire for safety, copper wire for telemetry, and copper wire for what? Oh, well, you know, balance, you know, checks and balances, you know? And it says, okay, so we shoot that out. If it starts to float, we use a little electric motor, man, to compress or decompress the torpedo while it's moving through the water, so we could do missile tracking. Oh, man. So you telling me about that? We did all that research? I'll tell you what. If the F.A.A. are such morons, they can't see that I would like to do ultralight tests with stuff to figure out how to make a proper airport to help these people land. You know, it's like my dad was doing nuclear research under the water. If the F.A.A. can't understand that, whoever's running the F.A.A., tell them to move to another country, because they're not for American associations. So if you're for American associations, I need a check mark. Pronto. A.S.A.P. You know what that means, right?